Today we find ourselves in the Cardo in Jerusalem, which is some ancient Roman columns which we're going to have a look at the moment. Just come from the Herodian Mansion, and it was a mansion that was built and owned and occupied by a high priest in Jerusalem. I'm going to talk a little bit about that, more about that later, but I'm just going to take you for a wander around the Cardo here and have a look at some of the sites. And we're going to start by looking at these Roman pillars. Of course, in the time of Jesus, this was of course a Roman city. So it has a very typical sort of Roman outlook and approach. We've got the archways, which there would have been shops, and we've also got the columns of the street. And this area of Jerusalem is called the Cardo. We actually have original paving stones along there. And today we're going to walk through to the other end. The Cardo at the very far end is actually quite a fancy, high-class shopping area. So we're going to move into a different area, and I'm going to show you a mosaic of what Jerusalem looked like in the time of Jesus. And this mosaic was found at Madaba, which is on the other side of the Jordan River. It's called, and this is a replica of the Madaba map, and we can sort of see here all the different features and elements of what Jerusalem looked like. This is the Madaba map, which is a copy of, it's called the Madaba map because it's discovered in Madaba, which is across the Jordan River, near the site of Mount Pisgah, near where Moses looked over. So over in that, it was a major city in the time of pilgrimage from around about the 6th century, when the Byzantine churches had taken over Jerusalem. And so what I want to show you is just a few little interesting things. This is a replica. This is obviously not the map. The map itself is in a church in Madaba across the Jordan River. So I'm just going to point out a few of the features that we have here, just so that you can see them. This is the Cardo that we're on, and that's a series of Roman columns with a statue that was a Roman statue that was the end of there, and it's a very typical north-south situation that you'd find yourself in any Roman city. They ploughed the city completely down to its foundations, and we've lost a lot of the history and the architecture and things like that in the general city because they literally removed it and then put a grid-type Roman city over the top. We have the Church of the Holy Sepulchre here, and we have lots of different churches that are put on the map here different way. This is the old city walls that we know of today are the same city walls that are around here. We had the Temple Mount up to this location here, which is fairly nondescript because it was completely removed and there was no worship. There was nothing happening from the destruction of the temple until about 700 AD, when the Muslims came and retook over the holy site and built the mosque and different things in those locations. These are all different city names of different things because this was a map. This was a pilgrimage map that would help people get around, and it had you look at the whole map and it's got even oceans and different things like that. This is a nice replica, and it's in the sense that it's mosaic tile, but this does no justice to the original. So this is a nice little interesting feature that they've got in the Cardo as well. Hi, we're in the location of the Cardo and the Madaba map, which are really good, and hopefully as we do a bit of a walkthrough, you'll enjoy that. But we've just come from the Herodian Mansion and we've taken some photos. Unfortunately there, we're not allowed to video inside. I was able to get a few sneaky photographs, but I want to talk about the Herodian Mansion, and you'll be able to see the photographs which I took inside of there. Now, the Herodian Mansion is actually a glimpse into ancient Jerusalem luxury. I mean, we see here that it's just a huge amount of wealth that was in this house, and it's probably a high priest type home. And we'll talk about why we think that and why that's important. So first of all, Jerusalem is a city of profound historical and spiritual significance. It is also home to a huge amount of archaeological treasures, and the Herodian Mansion is one of those, which is from the Second Temple period. Among these treasures, the Herodian Mansion has an impressive collection of a residence that covers probably the size of 2 basketball courts, 2 tennis courts in the sides in the middle of Jerusalem. Jerusalem was packed, so to have this amount of wealth was just unbelievable. How much money this person must have had to be able to afford a residence that was so large in the city at this particular time. And so this is part of a lifestyle of some of Jerusalem's elite, and like today, this is the uber wealthy, the extreme of wealth that's being on display here, that we're actually being seen in this historical context. So we'll have a look at some of the features, we'll have a look at some of the architecture, we'll have a look at some of the artifacts and explain, and it really is very helpful to understand what was happening in Jerusalem around about the time of Jesus until this mansion was destroyed with the Roman destruction in 70 AD. So where are we? We're in the upper city of Jerusalem, and it's sort of just above the temple area. So it's sort of outside the Temple Mount and outside the apron there, and you sort of climb up the hill a little bit. You can see the temple, its prime location. It's in the modern day Jewish quarter. It's where the high priests and wealthy Roman families also lived. So this is where Pontius Pilate would have lived. It's you know, this is where the extreme wealthy, this is billionaires, part of Jerusalem if we're thinking about in today's culture. So this is around 70 AD. When are we? 70 AD, when this Herodian Mansion was destroyed. So what was going on here at this time would have been very relevant to Jesus, who was about 40 years earlier, and in the time of John the Baptist and his family that also came from this very wealthy class. He wasn't a high priest, but he was very elite amongst the priests, so he would have fitted into this category of wealth and opulence as well, which is really interesting for understanding that we know John rejected all that, and he's living a very simple lifestyle down in the wilderness and near the Jordan River. So the house itself, so what happened here? The house itself is filled with stone artifacts that are consistent with a person's home, a normal household home, but also consistent with the idea of ritual purity. It contained dishes, cups, jars, a table, large water jugs, and I'm going to show you the large water jugs in a photo in just a minute. This is the water, and I'll show you, there's the water jugs, and the water jugs are the same water jugs where Jesus turned the water into wine, and in the same household they've got wine jugs. So you'll be able to see the difference between the water jugs and the wine jugs. Now the water jugs were made out of limestone, and therefore the water that was in there would be ritually pure, whereas the wine was made out of pottery, and pottery, if it got defiled in a certain way, if certain animals ran across it or became unclean in a certain way, then they could no longer be used, and they would eventually have to be destroyed or got rid of. So ritual purity was absolutely critical for a priest, and more so for the high priestly class, that they would go and have to worship and serve in the temple. So this mansion had lots of its own mikvahs, and where they would do ritual cleansing and purity, but it also had a Roman style bath in there. So showing us that one was used for cleansing, they go in and they would have a bath and they would cleanse themselves, and demonstrating that they had large mikvahs there as well, and these mikvahs were used for ritual cleansing. So there's two very separate and different things that are going on there. One is for personal hygiene, one is for spiritual purity. And the priests could not do their function in the temple unless they were actually ritually pure. So the potential for these being a high priest's home of the high priestly class, there was more than just one, there was a class of them. There was only one high priest who could go into the temple and offer sacrifice in the Holy of Holies, but there was that high priestly class who would be the priests who would be able to go into the inner sanctum of the temple and serve in those roles and serve in those functions. So and people are coming more stronger of the opinion this was definitely a high priest's house. So the house is filled with objects that are dedicated to following the laws of the Torah, or the first 5 books of the Bible. In this context, I want to have a look at Peter being in prison, because so how does it fit? Well, this is the sort of house that Peter comes and knocks on the door of. So if you're not quite sure of that story, let's go to Acts chapter 12, verses 6 to 19, and I'm going to read that for you. That night before Peter was placed on trial, he was asleep, fastened with 2 chains between 2 soldiers. Others stood guard at the prison gate. Suddenly there was a bright light in the cell, and an angel of the Lord stood before Peter. The angel struck him on the side and woke him and said, "Get up quickly." And the chains fell off his wrists. Then the angel told him, "Get dressed and put on your sandals." And he did so. "Now put on your coat and follow me," the angel ordered. So Peter left his cell, following the angel. Remember, this is happening in Jerusalem. But at the time, he thought it was a vision. He didn't realize it was actually happening. They passed through the first and second guard posts and the iron gate leading to the city, and they were all open for him as if by themselves. So they passed through and started walking down the street, and then the angel of the Lord left him, and Peter finally came to his senses. "It's really true," he said. "The Lord has sent his angel and saved me from Herod and from the Jewish leaders and what they had planned to do to me." When he realized this, he went to the home of Mary, the mother of John Mark, where they had gathered for prayer. He knocked at the door of the gate, and a servant girl named Rhoda came to it. When she recognized Peter's voice, she was so overjoyed that instead of opening the door, she ran back inside and told everyone, "Peter is at the door." Now, this is the sort of house that we're talking about, that he was living in this extremely wealthy part of town. To have a servant, to have a courtyard, it was in Jerusalem at that particular time, meant that you were like living in extreme wealth. So verse goes on, verse 15. You're out of your mind, they said. When she insisted, they decided it must be an angel. Meanwhile, Peter's still knocking at the door. This is such a funny story. Meanwhile, Peter's still knocking at the door. When they finally opened, because there's also security issues when you're that rich and you've got other people, you want to keep them on the other side of the door. Meanwhile, Peter kept knocking. When they finally opened the door to him, they were amazed. He mentioned to them and what had happened, and they quietened down and told him how the Lord had let him out of prison. "Tell James and the other brothers what happened," he said, and they went to the other place. At dawn, there was a great commotion amongst the soldiers of what happened to Peter. Herod Agrippa ordered a thorough search for him. When they could not find him, Herod interrogated the guards and sentenced them to death. Afterwards, Herod left Judea and went to Caesarea for a while. So let me go back and we'll talk about these stone vessels. And you'll see some pictures of comparing the stone vessels to the Roman or the pottery vessels. Now these vessels were made for people who were extremely wealthy, so they were the best that you could have, but still they were very clunky. They were made out of soft limestone that could be found in abundance in Jerusalem, and they were sculptured, but they weren't particularly decorative or aesthetically pleasing, because they had to be made out of one continuous piece of stone and had to be carved. So they couldn't be the fine artifacts like the Roman pottery that we're also going to see. The vessels were made on a lathe by hand, and they are more large than the pottery vessels, and they were anywhere up to 60 to 80 centimetres high, with thick and rounded walls, goblet shaped with a wide mouth, and on a pedestal. Now, there were also smaller vessels that were put on the lathes and could be made of various sizes of bowls and cups and plates and saucers and different items that needed to be used in the ritual purity and the high priestly home purposes. So among these vessels made by hand, they were broad trays and containers of various sizes. So some thought that they were sort of measuring cups or something like that originally, but they're actually cups for use in daily use and for purposes. So they were all handmade and they are all important. Now that the reason why is that something made of stone is made by God, and something made by God cannot become impure. Pottery is made by hand, and anything that is made by man or human hands can be defiled. So you say, well, but pottery is made from the soil of the earth. No, no, no. You see, stone can be carved and then is made by God. Pottery is earthen and mixed in the clay and shaped by human hands and therefore is made by humankind or mankind. So there's a distinction there. So something that's made by God cannot be made impure. Something that's made by man can be made impure. And there's a whole teaching that we could do on that. The difference between we are made in the image of God, therefore we can't be made impure. But all the things that are man-made or human-made can become impure. So the stone vessel industry flourished in Jerusalem during the 1st century CE and is related to the strict observance of Jewish laws and customs governing ritual purity. Now they were obsessed to the nth degree with this, and important that you understand this in the New Testament, the Gospels in particular, in Jerusalem in particular. It's a very localised event that's going on here, that this ritual purity is going on. So you need to understand that so that you can read that understanding into the gospel accounts of what's being said. So for instance, when you think about the wedding feast at Canaan, the water is being changed into wine. Now the water is coming out of those pure stone vessels, not out of the wine pottery vessels. So again, it's telling us something about the purity of God, being made in the image of God, and how that pure that represents God is what creates the miraculous, not the beautiful, ornate, man-made pottery items which the wine had been kept in, the wine had been flowing out of. So the stone vessel industry flourished in Jerusalem during the 1st century AD because of the strict adherence to Jewish laws and ritual. Now the purity of the stone is also mentioned in the New Testament miracle of what I said of the wedding feast at Cana of John 2:1-7. So it's important that we understand and read that in, and it starts to illuminate and help us understand the scriptures when there's different items about this purity coming. The story of the Good Samaritan is laced with that as well. And it's just important that we understand what's actually happening there, and that this idea, even the washing of the feet with Jesus, that's something to do with ritual purity as well. So Jesus is, and you remember the conversation with Peter, Jesus is saying, I will cleanse you wholly. But hang on, he's only cleansed their feet. But they've gone through some form of ritual cleansing and purity, but of course they've walked through the city, so their dust has got on their feet. But Jesus is washing their feet, and by washing their feet, he's making them clean, 100% whole, and not being able to make sinful or dirty or ritually impure again. So it's just embedded the whole way along. There's a really important find that we know, and that's the menorah, which is an engraving of plaster, and it's light coloured plaster dating back to the Second Temple period, and it's one of the few images we have from the temple of the menorah, 7-branch menorah depicted as found in the Jewish quarter. The menorah engraving is very small, it's only 20 centimetres by 12, and it has 7 branches with a flame on top of each branch, and it stands on a tripod. And because it's in the high priestly home, this is a really good idea. It's a very simple depiction, but it gives us a really good idea of what the menorah would have actually looked like. So a bit of an overview of the Herodian Mansion is it's a series of lavish residential buildings located in the Jewish quarter of Jerusalem. These mansions date back to the Second Temple period, specifically to the reign of King Herod, 37 to 4 BC, and their successors all the way up to the destruction of the Second Temple in 70 AD. Herod's extensive building projects meant that there was lots of money coming into the city. There was lots of money coming into the city because of the temple and people making their offerings and worshipping at the temple. So there was extreme wealth coming into and there was a small class of people who were living an extremely wealthy lifestyle. So again, we go to the idea of the cursing of the fig tree. It's not about the wealthiest person wins, it's about who's serving God, and they serving God appropriately in the temple. So the key features of the Herodian house is we have the architect design, which is very wealthy, it's luxurious. We see a reflection of Roman and Jewish culture in the design, and the buildings typically feature a combination of Hellenistic and Roman architectural style with columns that mimic Rome, literally the city of Rome, and the architectural features and the friezes and the pilasters. The mansion layout includes large courtyards, outdoor areas where they'd be cooking and preparing, elegant reception halls and private living quarters, and they use really exclusive materials like marble, and they had frescoes and very well-made mosaics that enhanced the building's aesthetic appeal and would have rivaled what was going on in Rome at that particular time. There's also mosaics and frescoes that we see in the Herodian mansions, and they're really interesting that what we see. Now again, we just see geometric and floral designs, no animals, no people. So again, that points to, again, in this class of people would always have gods, they would all have animals, but there's none of that there because they're adhering to the law of not having those depictions in the home. The walls of the mansions were adorned with frescoes, including detailed scenes from nature and architecture and everyday life. And the actual frescoes, some of them were coloured, and you'll be able to see that in the photos, and some of them were white, and even the ones that were white were actually designed to reflect the temple and what the temple would have looked like. And then in the same room, or the room next door, you've got frescoes which are very brightly coloured, reflecting the architecture and the style from literally Rome. So you've got those two things back to back and side by side. So the Herodian mansions were full of luxury and were designed to offer the utmost luxury features and comfort imaginable in Jerusalem at the time. They included private baths, dining room, elegant reception areas, mosaic floors, decorative frescoes, and high quality furnishings that you would expect to see in a luxury Roman residence. Some of the mansions also featured landscape gardens complete with pools and fountains. These outdoor spaces provided a very relaxing and serene environment in the middle of crazy hustle and bustle Jerusalem, particularly on the days of pilgrimage. So this just shows, again, you've got a high priestly class that's just got extreme wealth, not literally like billionaire wealth of today. So they're living in opulence and luxury, and a lot of the people who are coming to worship are maybe coming from taking 3 months on pilgrimage to get there, and they've saved and they can only do that once in their life, so they're coming to worship and serve God in the way that they want. And you've got the contrast of lifestyle and what's actually going on. So in conclusion, that these mansions represent a luxury and a lifestyle, and also it shows us the innovation that was going on in Jerusalem at that particular time. One of the nearby mansions has stone weights. So again, they would be, and remember the story of that you would tithe your mint. And so it's giving this idea of these very small weights that the priests were using to find out what was 10% of what they had purchased so that they could give it to the Lord. So they're even giving 10% of their fine mints and their sages and all those sorts of things. So it's a really interesting thing that's been going on here. So their luxurious design, intricate decorations, and innovative construction techniques reflected the grandeur of Jerusalem in that Roman style during the Second Temple period, which is also explains to us a little bit why they hung on for so long, because they didn't want to lose the money, they didn't want to lose the prestige, they didn't want to lose the wealth, and of course they didn't want Jesus coming and messing things up with them and the Romans. So we start to see this interplay between the Romans and the high priests and the elite. So if we read into that, it's very important when we talk about the crucifixion account and the trials in the last few hours of Jesus' life. We see why that the high priests and the others are siding with the Romans because they've got too much to lose and they don't want to give it up. So this is a window into the lifestyle of Jerusalem. The wealthy inhabitants of the Herodian mansions offers a rich and captivating glimpse into the city's past. So we're going to take you for a bit of a wander, take you for a bit of a walk through the Cardo, and we'll have a look at some of those Roman features. We'll have a look at the columns, we'll have a look at the part here, and this represents Roman wealth and luxury in Jerusalem around about the time of Jesus. Thanks guys, catch you later. So hopefully you've enjoyed our little walk through Roman and Jerusalem history today. We looked at the Herodian Mansion and why that's important. We've seen the Madaba map, we've seen the Cardo, and we've seen the Roman influence. So what we actually see here is the intersection of Roman influence and Jewish influence, but right at the very pinnacle and peak of that, they both relied on each other and they both fed off each other, and they were both ridiculously wealthy as a result of that. So hopefully that helps you a little bit with understanding the Gospels and the Bible, the idea of ritual purity and the idea of conflict that came in with the different groups and features. We'll see you next time. I hope you enjoyed our walk through Jerusalem today.